Good afternoon, everyone. A correction, I'm not the Chief Executive Officer for Rezolute. First of all, before I begin, let me thank the organizing committee of OIS, and especially Firas, for putting together this panel here. I think this is the first time we are doing an oral therapeutic segment at OIS, which is great, which also shows the fact that oral medications are probably going to be making a huge difference as we move along. I'm going to be talking, so I represent Rezolute, which is a company based out of San Francisco, Redwood Shores. We have two programs, and this is the ophthalmology focus program, RZ402. It's a novel therapeutic focus with, and like I said, oral medication focused on plasma kallikrein inhibition, and it's targeting diabetic macular edema as well as diabetic retinopathy. It's a publicly traded company, so I'm making some forward-looking statements. We've had multiple conversations in this meeting, and we all know that there has been, anti-VEGFs have really made a huge difference to patients with diseases like diabetic macular edema, macular degeneration, and stuff. But based on the data we have seen over time, the long-term studies as well as real-world data, we do know a lot of patients don't really tend to do well with anti-VEGF injections, especially if I consider diabetic macular edema. About 50% of the patients don't tend to do well in time. Apart from that, getting a patient to come back to the clinic over and over again, getting injections in the eye, obviously that's a treatment burden. Also, not just for the patient alone, but also for the clinicians in the clinic, because you have so many patients coming in, especially now with dry macular degeneration or GA injections coming into vogue. The number of patients getting injections is definitely increasing. Also, based on the fact that patients are getting injections, compliance becomes an issue. And so we know from real-world data that the number of injections that patients receive in the real world versus what we see in studies, definitely the number of injections that they receive in the real world are much less. And maybe that has an effect in terms of how ultimate visual improvement happens in those patients. So there is a lot of stuff that potentially requires us to do something different apart from anti-VEGF injections. And that's what I'm going to be talking about here. So what we are focused on here is our kallikrein kinase system, or KKS for short, which focuses on causing microvascular injuries. And so if you look at diabetes in general as a disease, it causes microvascular injuries all over the body, and DME is also almost like a part of that. So microvascular injury at the retina level, and that leads to all the problems that we face. KKS is pro-thrombotic, pro-inflammatory, and as well as promotes vascular leakage, which means that it is definitely involved in causation of diabetic macular edema. Inflammation is not targeted by anti-VEGFs, so again, there is a need for us to come up with something different that potentially can take care of those patients, especially those subset of patients who do not tend to do well with anti-VEGFs. In animal studies, plasma kallikrein injection was given to patients, and in animal studies where DME-like features were induced, but which was rescued by bradykinin antagonist, which is obviously RZ402 kind of a drug, but they were not rescued by anti-VEGF. So there is, like I said, a subset of patients, and I'll show some data, subset of patients who potentially are obviously not able to do well with anti-VEGF based on what we know so far. Kallikrein kinase system is a target for other indications in the rest of the other parts of the body. For example, hereditary angioedema, there is an approved drug that is being used for patients, and that has done reasonably well in those subset of patients. Let me direct your attention to two important aspects here. The two bar graphs here that we show, on the left-hand side is something what we call as a treatment setting, and the one on the right is a preventative setting. And what we know from preclinical data at this time is that RZ402 as a drug potentially has a role to play in preventative aspect of diabetic macular edema and potentially DR as well. And so what we have seen is, if you look at the left of the slide, almost 80% of those animal eyes that were induced with DME-like features, they had reduction in diabetic macular edema or vascular leakage when the DME-like features were induced in them, and then RZ402 was given to those animal eyes. On the right side of the slide is where RZ402 was given along with inducement of DME, and what we saw was that there was significant amount of attenuation of vascular leakage, which indicates the fact that there is probably a role for RZ402 to act as a preventative manner. And we've had conversations, Riyadh mentioned in the previous segment, about the fact that there is significant focus for us in terms of patients who we do not inject with the intravitreal injections, primarily because, let's say, for example, a patient with 20/20 vision with significant CST, you would not want to inject that patient, even though the amount of, or the number of complications are so limited, still it becomes a challenge from a clinician perspective. And so oral therapeutics, maybe eye drops, definitely have a role to play in terms of future management of those patients. So in terms of two important aspects here, studies have showcased the fact that kallikrein-kinin system is definitely implicated in diabetic macular edema, NDR, and also potentially in wet macular degeneration. So plasma markers for KKS have actually been seen to be elevated significantly in patients with non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy as well as diabetic PDR. Also, vitreous samples showcase the fact that they were increased almost 11-fold in patients with PDR and DME. So again, KKS definitely has a significant role to play in some ways in DME causation. So targeting that definitely makes a significant aspect here. So what we did was, based on all the data that we had from preclinical studies, we moved on to doing the phase 1 study. This was actually done in healthy volunteers. We had a single ascending dose study, multiple ascending dose study, and a third study we did, which was a tablet formulation study. All three of them were done at a single center. So we had 4 different dosing regimens in the multiple ascending dose study, which was 25, 100, 250, and 500 milligrams. They were, like I said, healthy volunteers were focused here, and we were looking at safety and tolerability of the RZ402 as a medication, as well as PK profile. So because this is the first time we're giving RZ402 to patients, so we are focused on safety. So from the study, we saw that there was no adverse drug reactions. There was no serious adverse events in that study, and there was no study discontinuation. There were minor AEs, and obviously, in studies where patients are committed to a facility and they are, intensely monitored, you do see some different variations coming in terms of minor AEs, so that's what we saw, nothing significant. Importantly, because this is oral medication, so we are supposed to see for effects that happen in systemic circulation or systemic parts of the body, and so we had an intense regimen of evaluation for heart rate, for blood pressure, for EKGs, to try and see if any changes have occurred, and we did not see anything at all. Lab investigations were unremarkable, but also importantly from an ocular perspective, with all the data that we see in recent days about clinical studies showcasing patients with vasculitis and inflammation and all that, we did not see any of that in the study that we had in the phase 1. In terms of PK, we had dose-dependent increase in systemic exposures. We had minimal accumulation of the drug following repeat dosing, which is an important thing to look at. Based on the 24-hour levels and an approximate half-life of 20 hours, it supports the potential for once-a-day oral dosing. And we need to remember this. These are patients with diabetes who normally take oral medications any which way. So it's an addition, an add-on drug for them to be using in a case like this. We also had large safety profiles compared to animal toxicology studies. And daily dosing of RZ402 was inhibited plasma kallikrein in a dose and concentration-dependent manner. So let me go over the phase 2 design, which is currently ongoing, almost about to end. So we have 4 arms in this study, 3 active arms with 3 different doses, 50, 200, and 400 milligrams. We're comparing it to placebo arm at this time. This is a phase 2A study. It's first in patients, so we wanted to make sure that we design a study that potentially has enough chances for success to showcase some benefit. And so we have about 100 participants in the study, 25 in each arm. We are dosing, again, like I said, once daily. We have 28 sites, and we are evaluating both eyes, which is an important aspect in terms of conversation. Endpoints are we're looking at safety, as well as the primary efficacy endpoint is CST change from baseline, and secondarily, we are looking at change in BCVA and diabetic retinopathy severity score, as well as repeat PK and fellow eye evaluation again. Key inclusion criteria, I just want to go quickly over this. So basically what we're looking at is a patient who does not have significant systemic disease, who has mild to moderate early stage disease primarily in terms of the fact that we don't want to focus on non-responders, we don't want to focus on patients who have received multiple injections. So we're looking at treatment-naive patients. We're also looking at patients who received significantly less number of injections, about 3 or less. And we also have other systemic parameters to be focused on as well. So the current status is the study is ongoing. We are about to finish enrollment of the patients. We are going to be coming out with top-line results early next year. Just to conclude, we know that kallikrein kinase system, based on the preclinical data, we know it's a novel therapeutic target, potentially likely to benefit patients with DME, DR, and other indications. Definitely oral medication will help in ease of use for patients. Phase 1 data has showcased safety at this time. We also have some PK values definitely showing benefit. And the phase 2 study is ongoing at this time, and we hope to come out with the results pretty soon. Thank you.